And he's going to be the speaker and leading the next conversation for all, and talking about disrupting healthcare and how we can bring medicines for all as well. Okay. So, Tony, the room is yours.
Okay, thanks, Enrique. Well, my name is Tony Quinones, and I want to give a little bit of a background on how this project started. It's really a merger of multiple initiatives up to the point where right time, right place, and right technology ended up helping to the possibility to accelerate a project that was initiated at the World Health Organization about 4 years ago. And part of the issue, what was being faced in the World Health Organization, as the focus was on malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis, and some other healthcare issues. As we know, there's patent pools, there's a great amount of distribution happening within the pharmaceutical industry, but what was continued on a very consistent basis is that there are a certain percentage of the drugs that could be purchased by a country or by a foundation, but what was happening was the manufacturing was the choke point. So the manufacturers would end up allowing for a certain level of drugs to be produced at the price they would want them to be produced at, but then when it got to that point, medicines were done. And so consequently what ended up happening is people with the greatest need had no way of being able to get the drugs that they needed. So the initiative started with the Gates Foundation doing an initial $5 million and looking at ways to eliminate that choke point at the manufacturing level and finding ways to put manufacturing in country with those drugs that the country most needed, so the distribution would become much more simple and the manufacturing would be based in country and start to develop an entire ecosystem of being able to self-manufacture these products. So as it continued to move on, this past year, an additional $25 million was placed into the project, which is headquartered at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. And a part of that initiative was to get a manufacturing, a small scale, small footprint in a decentralized way. So I just happened to be listening to a keynote, and I approached the speaker and I said, I believe I have a technology that I purchased years ago that's essentially sitting on the shelf that could potentially help you in your project. And really within 5 days, we realized through the technology teams that it was a perfect fit. It's not the only fit, but it is the initial fit to be able to start to produce the medicines in a very small footprint. And generally, these facilities would cost upwards 50 million, 100 million, 150 million, spread out on acres. And the thinking is how to miniaturize that and yet increase the volume. What types of technology could be used to be able to do that? So I was fortunate enough to be able to put on loan the technology to the Medicine for All group, and what we were able to see was that some of the medicines that were on the World Health Organization, that we were able to produce these medicines within what normally would take weeks and up to months, we were able to produce them in some cases within minutes. And we started to move forward, set up a facility in Richmond, and actually as we speak, the engineers and the tech team are sitting together in the labs and designing out the facility. And the intent of this facility is to be about a 20,000 to 25,000 square foot facility to produce the active pharmaceutical ingredients needed to make the medicines. Many countries like in India and China currently do this, but part of the issue is the amount of waste that is being produced, both in terms of energy, in terms of the byproducts, the harmful chemicals that end up pollutants and aren't properly disposed of, and it just continues to mount. There is a small amount of medicine that's produced, but the amount of the tons of waste that is produced does not fit. So what we were able to do is, through the modeling, through the testing, is to determine that not only would we be able to increase the quality of the medicine and eliminate harmful solvents and harmful precursor chemicals needed to make the medicine, that we were also be able, because you didn't need the large-scale facility, because you didn't require the solvents and the other types of chemicals in the process, by reducing and shrinking the steps to make the medicine, you were able to reduce the cost as well. So the interesting part about this was that we also came to realize, as my background as a life science VC, is that many of these drugs that go through design, development, through the clinical trial, every single one of them, when it gets to the point of clinical trial, needs to have a small batch of pharmaceutical product made. And oftentimes, the startup company that's looking to be bought by a big pharma company, or just pure-hearted scientists that really want to see their medicine into the hands of people and to solve that illness, what they were finding was that, what we found in kind of our informal polling, was that many of these people, the scientists, could not get their small batches of medicine made in a reasonable amount of time. Sometimes it would take 9 months, 12 months, and they'd be waiting in line, and it would cost up to $1 million to $2 million to get this small batch made. And we said, okay, this is ridiculous. We know that we can produce in one line 5 medicines simultaneously. They can do a changeover in a very rapid fashion. And we have another line that is able to take some of these emerging drugs and to be able to produce them in the small quantities that they need at a much lower cost. And as we were continuing to start to talk to the family offices that we work with, the feedback was like, wait a minute, you can really disrupt medicine in quite a big and quite a dramatic fashion, because that choke point, often with the CMOs, contract manufacturers, work closely with the CROs, and that length of time often isn't really necessary. You're sometimes adding on additional 2 to, in some cases, up to 3 years worth of work. And what is happening, costs are going up, the cost of producing the medicine goes up, and probably the saddest part for me is that there's a patient that could use that drug that doesn't get the opportunity to use that medicine. So we thought, well, let's go ahead and take this to the next level. We started reaching out to ministers of health. The first stop that we started was a group called COMISCA. And it's a consortium of 12 Caribbean and Central American countries, along with Ecuador and Dominican Republic just joined this group. And what they're looking at doing is they have their budgets, and they pool all of their budgets for the medicines that they need. But what they're finding is, of course, they don't have enough money in their budget for some of the drugs that they need. So I asked one of the health ministers, well, what do you do with, you have 3,000 patients that have cancer a year, and what do you do? And he goes, well, we only have a budget for 300. And I said, so what do you do with the 2,700? Well, you know the answer. They die. And you sit there and you say to yourself, okay, this is not the way the medicine patent pools, the way the treaties that are written to be able to allow developing countries to self-produce their own medicines. They often get blocked in a process patent, even though the molecule might be available to them. But for a lot of very profit-driven reasons, people are dying because they don't have the medicines that they need, yet the patent is available, the process is available. What is lacking is generally a facility or facilities that are committed to producing the medicines at the budget level that many of the countries can afford. And that's where our role came in. We were asked to produce a company to commercialize the project. We call that company BrightPath. So as we're moving forward on BrightPath and working with the medicinal chemist and the engineers in making the facility, we stepped back and said, okay, we need to update the controls and automation with this machinery. And as we were doing this process, fortunately one of the developers, I asked, I said, hey, because this is a decentralized model, is there any chance that we could put this on the block so we can have both public-private data, as that's a requirement to produce drugs with many of the regulatory bodies around the world? And he said, well, funny you ask, we've already done that. We're currently doing it in 2 FDA-approved facilities in which we provide traceability in order to provide the regulators the data points that they need to quickly analyze whether or not everything is occurring within that facility as it should, without having to step foot in the facility. So we stepped back and we said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and just change up our model here a little bit. We're not really that interested in whether or not every piece of equipment that in this first facility is going to be replicated in another country. What we're most interested in is the platform, the technology platform, the data points that can and should be shared not only with governments but also with scientists. So when you're producing a medicine, once it starts in that point where it comes into the first order to start producing that medicine, the traceability of that drug we currently have on the block. And what we're looking to do with this new facility is completely integrate all of the hard equipment and that processing equipment and provide the visibility for several reasons. You're able to see, you have snapshots of what's happening with the chemistry. You have snapshots of what's happening with any sort of issue throughout that process in the drug. And most importantly, you're able to really monitor not only that quality, the traceability, and making sure that it's the highest standard for the patient, but you're also able to check on the price. And some of the games that continue to get played with drug prices as they continue to go up, you can make all kinds of various excuses to why that may be. But when you have it in a public and parts of it that do need to be private, well, those games can't be played anymore. So we're pretty excited about being able to launch this. We're initiating an ICO on this, and we have our kickoff on the 31st on this, and we're looking to do with a portion of those proceeds is not just help facilitate getting that manufacturing facility built as quickly as possible, but also to bring it into our first pilot country, which we were just in Colombia last week, and they fell all over it and said, absolutely. We want to produce some of the medicines in our country that will align with the patent pool, that will align with our country's needs and our country's budgets, and we can adjust the process of making certain molecules and the visibility that they need within their healthcare network. Because it's on the block, we're able to provide that instantaneously to those people that need to have access to it. So we added another component to it because we wanted to say, well, what's the patient thinking? And that's where my colleagues, Enrique and Lily, came in. They're both from Colombia, and we got back and we said, look, the project's going to be a go. We have the pilot facility taking place in Richmond, Virginia. Simultaneously, Colombia wants to do the project as well. What type of data points can we start to get visibility on? What type of interaction can we have where we didn't have that type of visibility before? As we all know, pharma is just in many, many different places, and it's all isolated in different chunks. And then on top of that, it's isolated in different chunks. It's also the pharmaceutical industry is so broken apart and subcontracted out with so many people. So the amount of data that gets lost and the lack of collaboration because it is not, you don't have the visibility, we think that we really have a leg up on some of the other players in the industry that just want to continue to manufacture in the exact same way. The same batch process that has been used in the 1950s are still currently being used right now. And we have a wonderful opportunity to make a change in that. So that's the work that we're doing with BrightPath, and that is, fortunately, because of my great colleagues at Cavendish, they allow me to step aside from my role as CIO and to put all my attention on this because I really see that it's a wonderful project. And we're very fortunate with the Medicine for All group that's backed by the Gates Foundation that they are wide open. They want to see their medicines get made and distributed in a different methodology, in a different way, using technology, but also being a part of that disruption. So that's our project. So love to hear your feedback, challenges, things that we haven't thought of, ideas, just wide open.
I've got a couple of questions. So I also have a background in life sciences, and from what I understand, it takes approximately 10 to 15 years from the discovery of a new drug to it then reaching the market. How do you see your initiative as streamlining it?
Well, I think one of the things that, on the design side, born out of the university, sometimes that even takes even longer. I mean, I know that some molecules that some of the professors work with, it's been 15 years, and then they get to the step where they're about ready to go, we want to make a commercial product. Then it goes into that development stage. So where we think that we can really shrink the timeline, and this is where Columbia, we're very excited about working with them, is they have the ability to produce some drugs in country, very few, ibuprofen, nothing very sophisticated. So what the University of Antioquia, their team is going to allow us to start working on clinical trials. So some of the drugs where they cannot get, whether they're in Germany, they're in the United States, they're looking to accelerate their ability to get through a clinical trial. We now have the infrastructure in place to be able to initiate those clinical trials, be able to produce the amount of quantities that they're needed for those clinical trials. Will we be able to reduce 3 to 5 years off that timeline? I think absolutely. I think in addition, some of those drugs have already gone through stage 4 clinical trials. So they've been through human studies, but they've never been picked up by a bigger pharmaceutical facility. And we really think that that's our focus, and we want to target that.
Sorry, did you have another question? You said you had a couple.
After you.
I wanted to ask what drugs are you manufacturing?
Oh,
You said WHO.
oh,
Medicines. Which drugs are they?
so what the most important one that we think is a drug called Gleevec, which is a cancer therapy that is going off patent this summer. And so we began the process of reducing the number of steps on that. The other one is tenofovir. It's not necessarily the ideal drug, but it is one of them that we know that we've already reduced the number of steps, and we'll be able to produce and be able to distribute that. So, and we've got a number of other drugs that are in the pipeline. One of them, and it's not necessarily the ideal, but Cipro, an antibiotic. It's also off patent. We know that we're able to produce that, and we've got a couple other HIV drugs that we're able to produce.
These are trade names that are different in different countries. But, how do you stay up to date with the evidence as to how effective they are compared to their competitors?
That's a great question. I think that's a part where we think working with some of the groups like Enrique's group and getting that customer feedback. The model, for example, in Colombia is something that is really unique. They're a pharma-centric. And so the pharmacist distributes the medicine, does the evaluation, and writes that prescription. And they have these centers where you go in to receive your medicine. You have doctors, nurses that are not only prescribing but also getting patient data, drawing blood, asking questions, getting the type of feedback. So we think that's...
Yeah, what I mean is more science-based, where you need large cohorts. You need to be in medical centres and universities to have large cohorts of data analysed to check the effectiveness of medicines, which is massively expensive and very fast-paced.
Yes,
And there's a lot of competition, especially HIV drugs are changing so quickly.
yes.
So how do you keep up to date? So if it's taken you this much time to produce drug A, how can you be competitive against the clinical effectiveness of that drug? And of course, whichever population you're treating will have a different demographic to that population in which you've done your clinical trials.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's not necessarily directly applicable. And also, one drug doesn't solve a medical problem. You need a whole host of services around it.
Correct.
So it would be interesting to know who the partners are at the end user level to deliver the service, not just the drug. And also, compliance. People have to take the medicine.
Right.
So there's a huge attrition by the end user if it's not being delivered, if it's the service around the drug, monitoring it to the individual level, and then the person actually has to take it. And often those people that need the treatment the most are the ones that rely more on traditional healthcare, not on Western healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many barriers. It will be fascinating to find out about the periphery around this.
And I think what's sitting with health ministers, we've heard all of those issues, and we thought, Sometimes it's somewhat surprising that, yes, they have the same concerns. We ask them, well, what are you doing? They do their best with, their follow-ups with the doctors in their local clinics. Ask them how do they, provide that data back. Is there a possibility we can provide them electronic notebooks so we can get the data immediately? They're not only open to it, so we've got a couple. So on the patient side, we look to others to help us with that. When it comes down to the science side of it, we provide an electronic notebook to several laboratories. So as they're working, that data comes to us. So then the medicinal chemist then can take a look at what type of formulations that they can tweak, and that shortens the period of time, because when it goes to, yes, it worked great in the lab, now it moves on to you actually have to make it at scale. All of a sudden the chemistry and everything changes. So using electronic notebooks is helpful, and we're only working in a small group. So right now in the consortium of the universities are University of Washington, MIT, and VCU. Everything is currently housed at Virginia Commonwealth University, which also happens to be in the state of Virginia. It covers all of the healthcare services in the state of Virginia. So that hub is where we're centered around them. So all of their services are built around us. So I think the part that I'm probably most excited on a personal level is the project in Colombia, because that's the first really outside of the system to say, what happens to all of those millions of dollars that have been spent on the research, on the analysis, and that hope of some of the scientists of maybe being bought by a pharmaceutical company, no longer they didn't get bought. So what happens? It just sits. The company is no longer, but the molecules, the data is still valid. And there's oftentimes many countries, and we had to go through many, many meetings to go through this to say, why don't you be the first country or one of the few countries that takes the initiative, and if a drug is dropped in stage 3 or is struggling in stage 4, why don't you be the country to accelerate that? What would you do for the entire region and be able to provide these medicines? And they've agreed. They're from a budgeting standpoint, it makes sense to them. They see it's many ways to be able to reduce costs, but it's also another way for them to open up an economic sector that they currently don't have. They believe that they have the talent to be able to be a life science and develop more products within their own country. So we'll see how that progresses.
Great.
Sure.
It's very interesting.
I have one more. So you mentioned a very a case of blockchain technology being used in a capacity that is genuinely needed in the world at the moment. And I see the potential for your use of blockchain to circumvent the black market in counterfeit drugs. Can you make a comment on?
Yeah, that was something, and honestly, when my real approach on blockchain was on the controls and automation to operate a facility, and the data that we could then distribute throughout the entire supply chain. What I really was surprised about was the amount of counterfeits that happen, and they happen at the manufacturing level throughout the world. And that was something that as we were touring other facilities and speaking with other API manufacturers, what we were finding, and many of these people, of course I won't name any of the names, but one of them, one of our backers is a top 10 API manufacturer in the world, facilities in India and in China. And they know that there's the issue. They know that their competitors supply perhaps 20 to 30% of their product that comes into the US to get blended to make the product is contaminated in one way or another. The FDA knows that as well. So what we really believe is that because of batch manufacturing, that's where a lot of the contamination does come, and also people just making shortcuts. It's very difficult to monitor unless you have eyeballs on it. So the use of the block will provide with some of the sensors as the API is being produced, those sensors are able to provide all the constant data throughout that continuous flow. So that's where we think the We know in the US, the FDA wants to move away from the old style manufacturing with more sensors, more controls, and it only seems to be logical to put it on the block. And they have a couple meetings discussing this would be fantastic to have all the industry that is an FDA approved drug have that type of traceability. And we know some companies are out there making some attempts. We don't know of any that actually have gone through an FDA audit. Our process has gone through an FDA audit in a facility in the southeast region of the United States. So all of those data points that they need to monitor and say, yes, you are compliant, we've been able to capture and share that data. Now we're able to take it up to a next level, the actual manufacturing process. So that's where we think is that, you know, the amount of a precursor chemical that you need to put into the system to be able to make that API, we're able to, as that actual material is going into the system, we're able to monitor it from warehouse into the machinery during the process, once it's then all the way down into a pill form or into whatever form that the customer is asking for. So that's where we believe it really covers each step of the way. Now, the front end, on the development side, we're just initiating some of those discussions so we can get as much data and get them on the block as well, looking for more partners. On the distribution side, we've got a consortium of several countries that are interested in providing us with the data and information. One of the groups that's one of the largest in the world that provides traceability, we're working with them. They would like to, independent, we have to get approval on the FDA, but we can actually put a molecule throughout the entire process and trace it throughout the entire distribution point. So we just have to work with the medicinal chemist, and if the FDA will approve that, fantastic. We'll literally be able to trace that, technically, you'll be able to trace that drug from the very beginning of the process all the way to the point where the consumer is putting it into their mouth. That's how close it can get.
Would it be traced by some sort of cryptographically encrypted code, or?
Great question. I don't know. I don't know. On when you're talking about the molecule going all the way through the entire traceability.
I mean, are we talking about some sort of code on the package that you?
Yes. Yeah. There's a code on the package. Yes, and we can do that. That's we don't need any permission, and that doesn't affect the drug. But absolutely, coding it on the package. And one of the things that our team's excited about is that puts a standard. Is that they say that will be the bright path standard. So if you can't do it at that level, that traceability, then that will really hopefully put some pressure on other companies to attempt to do the same, and consumers will start to demand that their products have that level of traceability on it as well. And I think some of the stats are, some 30% of all the drugs distributed throughout the world are counterfeit and have quality issues. But because of the lack of regulatory bodies and just people to monitor the process, those numbers are really going to be difficult to change. I believe with the block, I think you can start really making people accountable, and that's brings safety to the consumer. Anything else?
What drug classes are you focused on at the moment? Mental health, cancer?
The health ministers have come back, and the list of the World Health Organization have come back with HIV, malaria, tuberculosis. So those are the top three. As we've sat with health ministers, they've consistently come back and said, we need cancer therapies. They're too expensive. We know that several are off patent. We know that some of them are available in the patent pool, but because of process patents, they're being challenged. They have been challenged if they've tried to make them in country. So we're working with with other teams to help those countries as they were able to make those cancer therapies. That's a big priority based on the feedback that we've got from the country. So that's where we'll keep our focus. They all sit back and they said, "My God, we could do this so much differently. We want to do this differently." And it's unfortunate that these are people that sometimes are in their 50s and their 60s, and they realize that they're part of the problem, and they want to try to solve for.
Healthcare in the developing world is not my expertise. I deal in battle with healthcare in the developed world, where the needs are different. In the developed world, you've got so many barriers, and thinking about clinical change and the health outcome is hard enough when you've got an infrastructure to work with. I was thinking through how you would overcome a lot of these barriers. I mean, I've worked in the Philippines, Vietnam, my cancer, head and neck cancer surgery friends have set up services in Ghana. They don't fly because you have got such barriers, and the cost of one medicine is just such a small picture, small part of the big picture. So it's a multifaceted.
Yeah,
So what you want is, if you're going to purchase a drug, you want to know that you're buying it within a service that can deliver that drug.
Yeah, consistently.
If you've got to the point where you've got the right drug, you've got the right community, that drug is relevant to that community, it's actually relevant to that type of cancer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've got the person to have it, and you've got the right people in that community to have it, because not everyone works for everyone. That little niche demographic of that community that work for, they need to take it.
I think
they need to take the drug.
I think a big part of what you're saying is precision medicine.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels of expertise in the field. It's great to have medicine in an affordable way, but how do you actually bring about clinical change? That's what matters.
Yeah.
And how do you do it, and how do you stop the side effects? How do you deal with side effects? And you're dealing with people who don't have access to public health information, so they can't go on Google and look at the side effects. They won't get a leaflet in a way that they can integrate the knowledge on side effects.
Do you know that often side effects are caused by the heavy chemicals or precursors that are the solvents that are used to break down part of it? No, part of it.
Like if you're administering an antibiotic to a kid and they get really bad diarrhea, one does, one doesn't.
Okay.
The mom's going to say, don't take it.
Right,
we don't trust these people. We'll take the herbal remedy.
Yeah.
We'll go to the local village shaman. So that's it. Your business model has failed because it didn't treat that disease. At the end of the day, it's that kid growing up, being healthy and contributing to the community of that village, that country, doing something with their life. That's the end point, the end outcome, the end result of this. So what are you measuring? That's what I'm interested in. What's the outcome? It's really interesting because I have no clue of this sector.
Well, I think
how do you measure the outcomes?
The part where the group in Colombia, they're capturing a lot of data because it's required by the payer, which is the government. So they kind of use a quasi public-private model. So when we were there interacting with them with the data points that they're capturing, they're able to go, to the clinic that's down by the Amazon to the ones up in the Andes. And that's part of the requirement as the medicine is being distributed to collect data from the patient. So Lily, who stood up and talked, she and Enrique are both from Colombia, and that's something that we're really excited about because all the data points are there.
Yeah.
But then, how do we improve upon more data points in which we can capture, roll it up, and start sharing it?
And are you also dealing with the cause? I mean, we were treating when I was a junior surgeon, we were in the Philippines treating a very, very rare type of facial deformity that's so rare in the UK. And it was possibly linked to gold in the water from a mine in that region in a really remote part of the Philippines. And we were partnering with one of the top departments at University College London that can look at the chemistry behind these potential causes for this. And it's just impossible to set up that kind of analysis and research without a massive organisation behind you. And so if you're going to treat those cases, great, but if the etiology hasn't been addressed, then they're just going to keep continuing. And so you need to also look at what's caused the problem if there's a community of people who've got TB in the area, you've treated the people who are affected, but they're still being exposed.
Yeah,
They're gonna keep
you
getting
want to
infected.
eliminate
So,
it.
so
Yeah.
where, what is the cause? And and it also, there's a lot of genetic causes to things as well. Often things are multifactorial, so it's really complex. And you want your venture to be really successful.
Yeah, so we think,
So
I'm really
it'd be
curious
really
about this.
interesting. It'd be really interesting to know how all those other aspects of this are working, and it's massive. It's
So with
huge.
hepatitis C,
Yeah.
that is one where Mongolia, Thailand, Colombia,
Yeah.
and there's one other country, have all agreed to work on a pilot project with us. The company, Gilead, has a new Hep C drug, and they've agreed for a portion of those drugs, like for example, Mongolia wants to eradicate, they have 40,000 patients with Hep C, so they want to eradicate it. So we came into the process and saying, okay, can we make that for them? Can we make that, provide the traceability throughout, and that's a great study. Because the government, it's single payer system, the government's paying for it, they want the data, they want to understand how these types of drugs that are unique to their culture, to their society, and that's it's not so much precision medicine that's on a or on a macro scale. With that Hep C drug, that's something that I think we've got the Medicine for All initiative that we're very committed to following and pursuing what they've asked us to do. Then we've got these other opportunities that the countries have asked us to do. Now, how do we go about doing it in the best way possible? And I think a lot of the questions that you're coming back with, I want to share the team with the team.
I mean, Hep C is treatable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hep C is once you've got the right treatment, the right drug, it's treatable, but you have to follow it up to
Yes.
make sure that you've got rid of the antibodies. But also, what is causing it? Is it drug use? Is it blood related? Where's the contamination coming from? You need to trace that,
Right.
and you need to stop it. And if it's a behavioural change in the community, that's really hard. If it's an industrial cause, then you're dealing with a different sector as well. That has to, I'm sure that has to go together with actually treating the disease as well. Otherwise, people just get reinfected.
Yeah,
And you fail.
and I think that's the part where
You've wasted your investors' money.
I was so excited,
Yeah.
and you start the conversation, you're thinking, yes, we're solving a part of the issue, but then now I think stepping back is, there are parts of it where we don't want to just perpetuate people taking medicine.
That's the other thing.
That's not the goal at all.
Yeah.
It's to eliminate the need to have to take medicine.
Yeah. Often these regions don't have public health programs that we are so lucky to have in the countries that we live in or we know with, we work with. So being able to educate people as to how to best look after their health and their children's health to reduce these sort of exposures is so important, if not more important, because then you can actually eliminate it. And also, you are helping people to look after themselves rather than treating and imposing our values and what we think they should do. We're actually helping them fix their own problems by knowing what to avoid. The children shouldn't go and play in those areas where they will be exposed to whatever bloodborne parasite, bacteria infection. So that is, that's a public health concern. There'll be cultural barriers. There will be the almost patronizing approach of imposing your thoughts and feelings onto others. So, for example, Right to Read is a charity set up by a previous management consultant who arranged books and libraries to be set up in, I think, Nepal. He just published a book about it, and we were discussing this at a group I'm a part of at INSEAD, and one of the points was, well, what books are we should he be introducing? Are we going to be imposing Western thought or Western ideas or Western concept of childhood onto other communities that have very different cultures? And also there are all sort of facets to that we need to be so sensitive to. And asking for a behavioural change in a community who's used to behaving in a certain way, again, what is the sort of the moral aspect of that, the sort of the ethical aspect of that, and what sensitivities do we need to help help share our knowledge so that others can use that basic scientific knowledge in a way that helps their communities, rather than us imposing what we know onto other people. So, I don't know the answers to that. These are sort of philosophical questions, but I do believe that these things can be barriers, especially intonation barriers, because it's very easy to offend or very easy to block people out and create barriers to communicate. It's hard enough within your own within your own hospital to get people to do something, because people have belief systems that how things should be done, right or wrong. Let alone the other side of the world with a completely different set of problems. So, it's really interesting to see what models of success there are, what actually works, what approaches work.
One of the real surprising things, we have an individual in the labs that he's a PhD molecular chemist. His uncle is the president of an African nation. And one of the exciting things originally with the Medicine for All team was like, this is great. We're training someone that can go back to country and help produce medicines that are unique and have the need in that country. The sad part is the individual wants to go work for Big Pharma. He doesn't want to go back and do that. And you really struggle with, say, how do we find the community, the country that wants to do it? Because you just can't assume just because he got his PhD and he's in the lab and he's so excited because, oh my God, I've just been able to produce this, that it just ended. And we were pretty disappointed, but there's really, we can't do. We'll find hopefully another route. And hopefully we'll find that in Colombia, because then everything, we take the whole platform, the technology platform on the IT side, the processing equipment. They've already got a network of their own healthcare system, and they have their own expertise of doing some small-scale manufacturing. It's generally ibuprofen. It's nothing heavy, but this is a real opportunity for them to have their own products developed with their own unique genetic makeup and be able to see what they're able to do out of it. And I think the data points that we can get out of it, hopefully we'd be able to see 2-3 countries be able to do this and see, start comparing data, because I think the point is to eliminate the need for certain medicines, for sure. And you're right, the root cause, if it's one of the things I thought about in Mongolia, they don't have like an HIV epidemic, and 40,000 Hep C patients really isn't a lot. Their population isn't tremendously large, but I know that they have lots of mining, lots of pollution, and I thought, what more issues do they have?
My advice, my perspective, my viewpoint is the people who know the patients the best are those local medics and clinical team. They know their community. They know what the causes are. They probably have no challenge to communicate it through, but they will know infinitely more than any government, public health level person as to what the problem is in which region. And they're often the hardest to reach. They're busy. They're actually exhausted and busy. Yeah. And there is no health worker that doesn't want to do better for their patients.
Sure.
So a great window of opportunity maybe to get to those people and get their information, which you're doing via your electronic feedbacks. Yeah. That I think is the best way, because the intention is to improve the outcome for their patients.
Yes.
That's pure intention. It's not looking at any other outcome really that's important for those guys. And they've got valuable information. There'll be such little microclimates of problems. It'll vary, like even within one region, there'll be little pockets of problems, unique.
Yeah.
Because of all the factors involved. So it's the people who are on the ground that will understand the community and their needs, and therefore what will work. Therefore, what will give your drugs the best outcome?
Right.
Best outcome. So and also they will be interested in the drug. They'll be interested in knowledge. There's no healthcare worker in the world, I believe, who doesn't want to know more about what works better. And they want to use the best technology.
Right.
It's the best thing ever in your clinical practice to have the coolest new drug or the best equipment. That's the best thing you can do for a healthcare worker. Give them really cool stuff to work with, and that way, you know, you're engaging, because they are the ones that will fix the problem.
I think one of the things that we find is I put the team together, and part of the team are straight pharma. They made a lot of money, and some of them are still working in industries, CEOs of big pharma companies. And one of the things that is somewhat surprised me is that at first the narrative, the story of what we're able to do, what we can do, they're excited. That's great. Let's make a difference. They want their daughters and their sons to be proud of the work they do. Okay, wonderful. That's great. Now we're getting closer to manufacturing. You know, construction starts in 2 months. Now, closer to health ministers and start seeing budgets and numbers coming in. And I always notice, and I always tell anyone I mentor, money changes people. Always. And it's disappointing because there's one side that says we can really disrupt medicine in a major way, providing the best technology and equipment instead of it being exclusive for the most developed nations. The more sophisticated technology is actually easier to use in many ways. It doesn't require it does require training, but it's not as sophisticated. Of course, when it breaks down, you know, the expertise. But a whole ecosystem is like part of the what I'm seeing taking place is that exactly what you're saying. Every medical professional we're speaking with, they want the best care for their patient. They want to be able to produce those medicines and get them into the hands of their patient. And one individual that really, if I could say, Medicine for All is great. I love what the Gates Foundation is doing in that area, that choke point, fantastic. I was standing next to Dr. Marshall Sumner at National Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. And we were standing next to each other listening to a speaker, and as the speaker was talking about Medicine for All and the technology and the improvements, he just kept saying, he was a self-talker. So he's talking aloud, he wasn't talking to me. And it wasn't talking at me, he was just talking aloud. And I bumped him and I said, well, that's what we do. We make that. And he just looked at me and he said, I gotta talk to you. So we pulled aside and I said, well, okay, Dr. Sumner, what's the issue? And he was the one that really made it real for me. He said, I have children that die in my arms. He's in Washington, D.C. Power, money, great teams, but patients still die in his arms because the medicine that's approved will not be made because there's not enough quantities that's required for those few patients. So no one will make it. And I said, we will. That's the whole point of what we're doing. We'll make it. We'll set up a facility for you. We'll use a facility which is an hour and a half away in Richmond from Washington, D.C. It's like that's the whole point of this. It is to save lives. Yes, there's one group that says, hey, one investor came in. He's important, strategic. He said, I think that's really cool. But here's a list of drugs that we really need to have these APIs made. And we can make them a lot cheaper using your process. Go ahead and go do it. So you see a split. You see the just making the product and selling it, and then solving a real patient need. And with Dr. Sumner, we're going to be back with him and his entire team in 2 weeks. We've got his initial list that he gave us of 10 drugs that he's got. He'll be off in Dubai February 9th speaking. And all of those unique issues that they find it's all the National Children's Hospitals getting together, those unique rare diseases that they constantly see. They're starting with children, but the root cause, where did it really start with? Is it some of it's genetic, some of it's environmental? And that's where I'm really hoping, I love Medicine for All, I think it's fantastic. Where Dr. Sumner and what they're facing with some of the rare disease that, billions will get spent, millions spent in getting it approved. Now it's approved, but no one is making the product because it doesn't have the profit. And it just really like mind-boggling. We met with some people really significant on the philanthropic side that see the issue. That if you can self-manufacture, then you eliminate that issue in the country of, like with HIV, you're always going to need to continue to make the medicine. They're on it for life. But they're also then having to have a donor nations helping them supply the need. And I think there's a couple pieces of the model that are going to get broken out, and which one works best will, I guess, in the next 3-5 years, we're going to find out. But it'd be great. So, but thank you for the questions.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, I was a PhD student in philosophy, so in religion, and I dropped out of the program, but I'm always thinking. So when you were asking the questions, I'm like, oh man, this is what I miss. Yeah, there's the technical side of it that is fascinating, the business side, the human side, and really struggling with there's ethical and moral compass in all of us that have got to say, why are we doing it this way?
Yeah.
It's not just about the efficiency.
Yeah, but also why are we doing it? Is it because we can, or is it because we should?
Yeah.
Always added.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks guys.